Hi, Professor Barati here. I'd like to go over the chapter on process costing with you. Job costing, I think, is relatively straightforward with journal entries, and it's debits and credits of workflow through the 3 inventory accounts that manufacturing companies have, and the cost of goods sold, and manufacturing overhead techniques. Process costing is a method of product costing similar like job costing, but it is used in industries where each unit of production requires approximately the same amounts of direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead. These are the type of industries that have continuous mass production of identical units, such as Coca-Cola, a shoe factory, even an automobile factory assembly line that makes the same model car. The purpose of any product costing method is to allocate production costs to units of production. So basically that's all we're trying to do, is allocate costs effectively and efficiently to units of production, so we know what our unit cost is. Let's introduce the concept of equivalent units of production. Process costing is based on the concept of these equivalent units. Equivalent units measure the relative amount of production completed. Let me repeat. Equivalent units measure the relative amount of production completed. For example, 100 units that are 60% complete represent 60 equivalent units. There are general procedures to do a process costing problem. So basically, we have 4 steps. So step 1 summarize physical units. Step 2, once you summarize physical units, we will compute equivalent units of production. Step 3, compute cost per equivalent unit. Step 4, allocate production costs to ending WIP inventory and units completed. So allocate production costs to ending WIP and units completed. These are your 4 primary steps. Summarize physical units. So let's go to this problem I have, and let's go through the steps. The key to doing a process cost problem is to basically follow your steps here in a logical fashion and set up a good matrix. And basically, a good matrix and know where your numbers go, and it starts to make sense. So let's look at some of our problems here. Summarize physical units is step 1 right here. We're told that beginning WIP inventory is 10,000 units, of which conversion costs are 50% complete. If a problem does not tell you any percent of direct materials, it is assumed that direct materials are 100% complete as an equivalent unit. So a direct material gets 100, an equivalent unit gets 100% of direct materials. Units started or transferred in. Now, units started could be units started that go into our WIP account, or they could be transferred into our WIP account from another department. So now we add in we introduce a little more complexity. For example, an assembly line has different processes. Some of these processes might actually be departments with their own budgets, their own supervisors, and their own staff, in which overhead is allocated to the department and then allocated to the product. But we won't get into that. So if an assembly process might have 4 or 5 different processes or departments, and therefore when Department A is done with the product, it becomes Department A's finished goods, but goes on to Department B as a work in progress process. So one department's finished good is another department's WIP and vice versa. So that's why we have the term transferred in, and you'll see when I explain this column right here what that's all about. So transferred in was 15,000, so units to account for is 25,000. Ending WIP inventory was 20,000. The problem tells us that 40% of the conversion costs, of which 20,000 is ending inventory, 40% complete for conversion costs. Units completed of 5,000, therefore units to account for is 25,000. So let me emphasize this. Units accounted for in this section and units accounted for in this section, they must equal. They have to equal. This is nothing more than a T account, which I will show you right here. So beginning inventory, we were told are 10,000 units. Add started or transferred in. We're given 15,000. Ending inventory. We are told is 20,000. completed is the balance, which is 5,000. That's all this summarized physical units step 1 is all about. Very simple. Just so you know, this completed credit is your cost of goods manufactured number that goes on your statement of cost of goods manufactured in units. We are also going to do this in dollar terms, so you see that this is actually a cost flow, just like job costing, where you can do T accounts and it balances out. So now, just to show you that some problems might give you beginning WIP, but nothing started. But it'll give you ending WIP completed. So this will be the unknown, the X. You might not get this number. But if you know the rule that this section of units, physical units, must equal this section, it is very easy to know that that number will be 15,000. You might not get the number of units completed. There might be an X, unknown. Again, rule, in process costing, beginning WIP plus started must equal ending WIP plus completed. So if you don't know any of these numbers here, as long as you know the rule, you'll get the answer. Because all it is the T account where the debits minus the credits have to equal your ending inventory. They have to balance. The next step is compute equivalent units of production. So let me introduce this column. You're probably comfortable by now with these two columns, materials, which is really direct materials. So let me be specific here. And conversion. We know that conversion costs basically equals direct labor plus manufacturing overhead. That's the definition of a conversion cost. So this transferred in column is essentially represents a department or division of a particular department. So when more than one production department or process exists and units of production are transferred from one department to another for further processing, the costs associated with those units must be accounted for. If Department 1 transfers 10,000 units of production to Department 2, the units would be considered transferred in costs for Department 2. So that's basically why we have this column. This is probably the most complex process costing problem you will get on an exam. That's why I'm giving you the hardest one. So our particular department, and you can call it whatever you want, assembly or fabrication or painting or, whatever you want to call it, we got 10,000 units from another assembly department or another department in the process costing system. Now, the step 2 is compute equivalent units of production. So set up this grid right here and give yourself these columns. Transferred in, direct materials, and conversion costs. Now, we are not told anything about direct materials, but we are told that direct materials, we are told that conversion costs get 50% complete for beginning WIP and 40% complete for ending WIP. For transferred in, here's how I would approach doing this first. Work on the bottom half of your physical units first. And start with completed. Completed, we know as a physical unit is 5,000. Now we have to convert those 5,000 physical units into equivalent units. Completed inventory is always 100% for transferred in, direct materials, and conversion, because they are completed. They are completed. That means they went from WIP to finished goods. So for something to go out of WIP into finished goods, it's done. It's 100%. That's a no-brainer. So take your 5,000 completed units, transferred in, they're going to be 100%. For direct materials, they're going to be 100%. For conversion costs, they're going to be 100%. So if you know nothing about process costing, you should be able to get this line right. Next, go to your ending WIP inventory. Ending WIP inventory for transferred in is going to be 100%. 20,000 units were transferred in. The direct material portion of our equivalent units, because we weren't told a percent, get 100% of the beginning WIP inventory. But we are told conversion costs on an equivalent unit, relative equivalent unit, is 40% of ending WIP. 40% of 20,000 is 8,000. Add these up to get your equivalent units. 20,000 plus 5,000 is 25,000. 20,000 plus 5,000 is 25,000. 8,000 plus 5,000 is 13. Now, the next step, because you know the total equivalent units for the bottom half of your physical units to account for, you know that the top must equal the bottom units to account for. Therefore, the equivalent units on the bottom must equal the top as well. They must equal. So equivalent units on the bottom to account for must equal the equivalents on the top. So what I would do is, once you get your total equivalent units here, I would make sure that your total for your top half of the physical units of production equal the same amount. Next, go to your beginning WIP inventory. 10,000 is 100% transferred in. So transferred in is always going to get 100%, just like direct materials, unless it's stated in the problem. Direct materials, we were not given a percent, so it is assumed that it's 10,000. And the conversion cost, we are told, for beginning WIP inventory is 50% complete. So 50% of 10,000 is 5,000. So we've computed our equivalent units here and totaled it. We've now know the total of equivalent units on the top half of our physical units of production. We've now spread out the beginning WIP. So you're probably wondering how these numbers started. They're nothing more but a plug to get from 10,000 to 25,000. To get to 10,000 to 25,000. To get to 5,000 to 13,000. Nothing but a plug. So, the difference between 25,000 and 10,000 is 15. The difference between 25,000 and 10,000 is 15. The difference between 13,000 and 5,000 is 8. So, this number here represents the equivalent units of production for the units that were started or transferred in. So now we have our equivalent units of production for each section. Using the weighted average, these are going to be the units that we are considered weighted average units of production. So this is weighted average. As I highlighted here, the difference between the weighted average equivalent units of production and the FIFO method is the FIFO method is only concerned with the current production. FIFO, first in, current. So the FIFO method is only going to use the units started or transferred in because that is current as your equivalent units. In our problem, we are given costs. We are told that transferred in costs for beginning WIP is 60,000. Current production for transferred costs is 10,000. So the transferred costs go under the transferred column, and they total 70,000. Direct material costs. We are told beginning WIP direct material costs are 10,000, and current production is 15,000. They go under your direct material column, and that equals 25,000. Our conversion cost, beginning WIP is 6,000, current production is 3,000. We put them under the conversion column for a total of 9,000. Now, for weighted average purposes, equivalent units, you're going to use your weighted average equivalent units, and the costs that you're going to determine your costs per equivalent unit are going to be the totals right here. These are your weighted average. And I'll designate that right here as WA for weighted average. Notice I've highlighted in yellow the FIFO costs. When we compute FIFO costs per equivalent unit, we are concerned with just current production as we are with current production in equivalent units. We're only concerned with current production dollars. Do not, for FIFO purposes, use the total numbers with current. You'll get the wrong answer. So it's current to current, and for weighted average, it's weighted average to total costs. So let's go down each column and do the next step, which is compute cost per equivalent unit. The cost per equivalent unit is simply taking the total cost and divided by the equivalent units. So in this case, we're going to do weighted average first. So, weighted average equivalent units, I basically took my totals here and brought them down here. My cost per equivalent unit for weighted average is, you can see my formula, I-22, which is the total 70,000, divided by I-31, which is my cost per equivalent unit here, which originated right here. So 70,000 divided by 20,000 gives me a cost per equivalent unit of $2.80. Now under direct materials, my costs are going to be my total cost of 25,000 divided by my weighted average equivalent units of 25,000, which is $1. And on conversion costs, my total cost of 9,000 divided by 13,000 equivalent units, my cost per equivalent unit for the weighted average method under conversion is 69 cents. Step 4, allocate production costs. How do we do that? Remember, we are allocating production costs to ending WIP and units completed only. Don't try to do beginning WIP or current. It is strictly ending WIP and units completed. Why? Because the beginning inventory was last month's ending inventory. So last month's ending inventory became this month's beginning. That had been costed out already in a process cost system. So there is a cost already associated with. Current production is already, costs are already known, because the current production is known because we, as you remember, we debit materials, we debit WIP by direct materials, we debit WIP by direct labor, and we debit WIP for manufacturing overhead applied manufacturing overhead. So the current production is known based on our statement of manufacturing costs. So the debits are already there. It's the ending inventory and the completed that we don't know. We don't have a valuation, so we have to put that in. We have to calculate that. And here's how we do that. The ending WIP inventory equivalent units using the weighted average. You take the ending WIP inventory equivalent units, which is 20,000 under transferred in, and you simply multiply it by your cost per equivalent unit that you just calculated. So your ending WIP inventory is 56,000. Next step, your direct materials for ending WIP is 20,000 equivalent units times your $1 cost per equivalent unit equals 20,000. Your conversion costs, ending WIP, 8,000 times 69 cents is 5,538. The sum of your ending WIP inventory allocation, ending WIP inventory only using the weighted average method, is $81,538. Next, completed WIP. Same method, except you're just going to pluck off the 5,000 units, equivalent units under transferred in, and multiply it by the same cost per equivalent unit. Go to your direct materials and you see 5,000 completed equivalent units for direct materials times the $1 cost per equivalent unit equals 5,000. Go to your conversion cost column and you'll see that your costs, your equivalent units are 8,000 times 69 cents is $5,538. I'm sorry, 5,000 times 69 cents is $3,461. So allocated total is $22,461.54. So these two combined equals $104,000. So your ending WIP is 81 and your completed WIP is 22,461 for a total of $104,000. So let's show this in a T account so you can see that that's all this is, and there's another fancy way of basically showing your WIP account in dollar terms. So our beginning inventory is going to equal beginning inventory costs have been given to us. So it's transferred costs beginning plus direct materials beginning plus conversion costs beginning. Added current production. $10,000 from transferred in. Current production is $15,000 from direct materials, and current production from conversion costs. Completed equals right here. Total 22,461. Ending. If you take this plus added minus completed, it is going to equal $81,538, which is exactly the number that you computed. So as you can see, this is nothing but a laborious task of figuring out your WIP inventory balances. Now, the new month starts. This ending inventory of $81,538 becomes your beginning inventory for the new period, right? And therefore, you know the details of that. You know that the $81,000 is $56,000 transferred in, $20,000, and $530. That's going to be your beginning WIP numbers. So your beginning WIP for the new month for transferred costs will be $56,000, $20,000, and $5,538, because that's your ending WIP breakout. And so it just becomes a cycle. So let's go to FIFO, and FIFO is basically similar, except we're going to figure out the FIFO equivalent units, but they've been figured out for us. You figured it out when you did the plug. So instead of using the total equivalent units, the FIFO is your current production, which is right here. So take those numbers and line them up under transferred in, direct materials, and conversion costs. Now, the costs that we're concerned with are current, not total. So you're going to take just current production from transferred in, place it here. You're going to take current production from FIFO, place it here, and current production for FIFO under conversion costs, and basically do the math. So 67 cents is going to be your current cost divided by your FIFO equivalent units. 15,000 divided by 15 is 1. And your current cost divided by 8,000 FIFO equivalent units is 38 cents. Next step, just like in weighted average, allocate cost to production. We're going to allocate it to ending WIP first. How do we do that? The cost per equivalent we know is 67 cents. So allocate to ending WIP is 20,000 for equivalent units. So ending WIP is 20,000 units times your equivalent unit for FIFO is 13,333. Ending WIP inventory is 20,000 times an equivalent cost per unit of $1. And ending WIP inventory of 8,000 equivalent units times the FIFO cost per equivalent unit is 38 cents, gives you 3,000. Total 36,333. Next step, just like we did, is allocate to completed WIP inventory. But how do we do that? The weighted average took the exact 5,000 of completed under weighted average and multiplied that 5,000 by the cost per equivalent unit. Under the FIFO system, we do not do that step. All we do is very simple. Once you get the ending WIP inventory valuation, take the total cost, which is 70,000, 25,000 for direct materials, and 9,000 for conversion to cost. Take the total cost and subtract the ending WIP valuation from total cost to get the allocation to your completed inventory on a FIFO basis. So all you're doing is really plugging it. You're taking the difference between total and your ending WIP and saying the difference has got to be my completed. So you do not even have to do this step. FIFO is actually easier as long as you remember to stick with current equivalent units and current costs to get your equivalent unit cost per equivalent unit on the FIFO right here. You then take the WIP equivalent unit and ending inventory and multiply it by the cost per equivalent unit, and then back into your completed by knowing what your total costs are and subtracting the two. So let's go to our T account and balance this out using FIFO. So your beginning inventory is going to be the same. It's beginning WIP, direct materials, conversion costs. This number doesn't change. Production started does not change. So you take these three numbers. Completed is different under FIFO. Under completed, we calculated 36,333. I'm sorry, 67,667. Notice it's much higher than the weighted average. So 67,667 is completed. Your ending inventory is going to be this plus added minus completed is going to be ending inventory, which will equal the 36,333. Which it does. So, step 1, summarize physical units. If direct materials are not given to you as a percent complete, it's assumed 100%. When it says 50% complete or 30% complete in a problem, they mean conversion costs. So only worry about the conversion cost column. Direct materials will get 100%, again, unless the problem tells you differently. So beginning WIP plus started equals units to account for. That's the debit side of your T account, which is right here. Ending WIP plus completed is the remaining part of your WIP account. So units to account for on the bottom have to equal units to account for on the top. Create a grid or matrix. Put your transferred in column, direct materials, and conversion costs. Then spread these out to this section. Start with completed. Completed is always going to get 100% no matter what column you're in. Transferred in, materials, conversion costs, 100% completed. Ending WIP inventory. Whatever number your ending WIP inventory is, okay? It's going to be 100% transferred in unless otherwise stated, 100% direct materials unless otherwise stated. Then you take your percent complete and apply that to your conversion. These two numbers give you your equivalent units of production totals. And these are the equivalent units of production used for the weighted average method. Then go to your beginning WIP. Again, spread it out along your matrix. 100% of beginning WIP inventory is transferred in unless otherwise stated. 100% of beginning WIP inventory is direct materials as an equivalent unit unless stated. The percent complete is your conversion, relative conversion. Take your percent complete, multiply it by your beginning WIP inventory physical unit to convert into equivalent unit. This must equal this. Top must equal bottom total. Therefore, your difference is your started. So your equivalent units of production is simply the difference between your total and your beginning WIP. Take your beginning WIP costs for transferred in and your current production for transferred in and place them under the transferred in column. Take your direct materials and your beginning WIP, beginning WIP and current production under your materials, and under conversion cost, beginning WIP, current production under materials, under conversion, I'm sorry. Weighted average. Take your weighted average, equivalent units, and come up with a cost per equivalent unit. So it's the total under weighted average. So 70,000 divided by 25,000, 25,000 divided by 25,000, 9,000 divided by 13. You get a cost per equivalent unit. Then allocate your cost to production. 1. Go to your ending WIP. Take your ending WIP equivalent units, which you calculated right here, and multiply them by your cost to get your total allocation to ending WIP. Completed. Take your completed equivalent units for transferred in materials and conversion, multiply it by the same cost per equivalent unit. Now keep in mind this is weighted average, so you can do it this way. It's a weighted average, and multiply it out. And there's your answer. Under FIFO, you are only concerned to get the cost per equivalent unit. You're concerned with your current production equivalent units and your current production costs. Therefore, simply do the math. Take your equivalent units and your costs. Take your cost divided by your current production units, your current cost divided by current equivalent units, and so on to get your cost per equivalent unit using FIFO. Then apply your cost per equivalent unit FIFO to your allocated to your ending WIP inventory equivalent units right here. To get to the completed WIP inventory valuation under the FIFO method, simply take your total production cost, which is given to you here, subtract the ending WIP from that to back into your completed FIFO valuation. And that concludes a very detailed process cost system with T accounts to show you how it flows. I hope this helps you model out. I think half the battle is just coming up with the right spreadsheet that works for you. And then it's all basically the same process. Thank you.